Did you know that you might literally be killing your tomato harvest with kindness? You spend hours watering, weeding, and feeding your plants only to end up with giant green bushes, rotting fruit, and a totally disappointing yield. Today, we are diving into the ultimate guide on tomato fertilizing mistakes. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will discover the surprising truth about how to properly use nitrogen, potassium, calcium, and boron, and why the things you thought were helping might actually be hurting. We are even going to expose a massive internet secret involving pharmacy salt that could save your garden this season. So, tell me right now before we start, have you ever buried Epsom salt under your tomatoes because you saw it online? Let me know in the comments. Before we dig into the biggest mistakes, let us quickly set the stage. Tomatoes are incredibly hungry plants. Originally hailing from the mountainous regions of South America, they have been bred over centuries to produce massive, heavy fruits. But to do that, they demand a very specific diet. Think of plant nutrition like a building block system. The four main pillars of this system are nitrogen for the leaves, potassium for the fruit size and flavor, calcium for structural integrity, and boron for successful flowering. If just one of these elements is missing, or worse, if one is provided in ridiculous excess, the entire biological machine breaks down. Getting the balance right is the difference between a sad, struggling vine and a record-breaking summer harvest. Let us start with the first major mistake, which is the nitrogen trap. You look at your tomato plants and think, I want them to be huge and green, so you dump a heavy nitrogen fertilizer on them. But what really hides behind this green explosion? A massive disappointment. Nitrogen is absolutely essential for leaf growth, especially in the early stages of a tomato plant's life. But if you keep feeding them high nitrogen when they should be flowering, you are telling the plant to focus only on making more leaves. Imagine a bodybuilder who only works out their arms and forgets their legs. Your tomato plant becomes a giant, leafy green bush with absolutely zero tomatoes on it. A great illustration of this is when you see a tomato plant reaching 6 feet tall, looking like a lush forest canopy. But when you look closely, there is not a single yellow flower in sight. We need to debunk the myth that a greener plant is always a healthier, more productive plant. When those first flower clusters appear, you must cut back on the nitrogen immediately. If you do not, all that energy goes into the foliage, and your harvest will be basically non-existent. You are literally starving your fruit by feeding your leaves too much. Now, let us move on to the second crucial element, and that is potassium. So, you have managed to get some fruit on your vines, but why do they look so sad? Potassium is the magic ingredient that makes tomatoes big, juicy, and delicious. It regulates the water inside the plant and moves sugars into the fruit. A severe potassium deficiency leads to a very specific and heartbreaking problem. Have you ever picked a beautifully red tomato, only to find that the top part, right around the stem, is hard, yellow, and completely unripe? This condition is often called yellow shoulders, and it is a classic cry for potassium. Imagine baking a cake but forgetting the sugar. It might look like a cake, but it tastes terrible. That is exactly what happens to your tomatoes. Without enough potassium, the fruit stays small, the walls become thin, and the flavor is totally washed out and watery. Many gardeners mistakenly think that tomatoes just need more sun to ripen those yellow tops, but sunshine will not fix a nutrient shortage in the soil. To get those heavy, prize-winning, perfectly red tomatoes that taste like summer, you have to ensure a steady supply of potassium as soon as the fruit begins to swell on the vine. This brings us to one of the most terrifying sights for any gardener, the calcium crisis. You walk into your garden, spot a huge, beautiful green tomato, but when you turn it over, the entire bottom is black, sunken, and rotting. This nightmare is called blossom end rot. Most people immediately panic and think they need to dump pounds of calcium onto the soil. But here is the fascinating twist, and it is time to debunk a major gardening myth. In 99% of cases, your soil actually has plenty of calcium. The real problem is that the plant cannot drink it. Calcium moves through the tomato plant along with water. If you let your soil dry out completely and then suddenly flood it with water, the uneven moisture stops the calcium from traveling up to the fruit. Think of it like trying to drink a thick milkshake through a broken straw. The nutrients just cannot reach their destination. A perfect illustration of this is growing tomatoes in pots. Potted plants dry out incredibly fast, making them prime victims for blossom end rot. The secret to fixing this is not necessarily adding more calcium to the dirt, but keeping your watering schedule strictly consistent. Smooth and steady watering saves the day. Let us talk about a trace mineral that almost everyone ignores, which is boron. You might be asking yourself, why are my tomato flowers drying up and falling right off the plant without forming any little tomatoes? This condition is known as blossom drop, and while extreme heat is often the villain, a hidden boron deficiency is frequently the real culprit. Boron is like the microscopic traffic cop of the plant world. It is essential for cell wall formation, but more importantly, it is critical for pollination. Without a tiny amount of boron, the pollen tubes inside the flower cannot grow properly, meaning the flower simply cannot turn into a fruit. Imagine building a beautiful house but forgetting to put doors on it. The structure is there, but nothing can get inside. Your plant spends all this energy making beautiful yellow flowers only to drop them uselessly onto the dirt. Because boron is a micronutrient, you only need a microscopic amount. But its absence is absolutely devastating to your harvest. A simple soil test can reveal if you are lacking this vital element. Do not let your harvest slip away just because your soil is missing a fraction of an ounce of this invisible yet highly essential mineral. And now we must tackle the most famous internet gardening trend of all, the pharmacy salt myth. You have probably seen 100 videos telling you to bury Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate, under your tomato plants for a miraculous harvest. People treat this cheap pharmacy staple like it is magical fairy dust. But what is the actual truth behind this viral advice? Epsom salt only provides magnesium and sulfur. If your soil is actually deficient in magnesium, which causes the lower leaves to turn yellow while the veins stay dark green, then a little Epsom salt can be a great quick fix. However, blindly dumping magnesium into your soil can trigger a massive disaster. Remember calcium, the mineral that prevents rotting tomato bottoms? Well, magnesium and calcium fight for the exact same roots. If you overload the soil with pharmacy salt, the roots absorb all that magnesium and completely lock out the calcium. So, by trying to follow a clever internet hack, you end up directly causing blossom end rot. Imagine trying to board a bus, but a crowd of people pushes in front of you. That is what magnesium does to calcium. Stop using pharmacy salt unless a soil test specifically tells you that you need it. Moving right along, let us look at the critical mistake of bad timing. Fertilizing your tomatoes is not a one-size-fits-all event that you can just do whenever you feel like it. Timing is literally everything. One of the biggest errors is giving a fruiting fertilizer to a tiny, young seedling. When you put a baby tomato plant in the ground, it needs phosphorus to build a strong, deep root system, and a little nitrogen for early leaves. If you feed it a heavy potassium mix meant for making huge fruits, the plant does not know what to do with it. It is like feeding a newborn baby a heavy steak dinner. It is totally inappropriate and can actually stunt the plant's growth permanently. Conversely, if your plant is loaded with heavy green tomatoes and you give it a starter fertilizer, You are just feeding the leaves while the fruit starves. A great illustration is the life cycle of a butterfly. You do not feed a caterpillar the same way you feed a butterfly. You must switch your fertilizer from a balanced growth formula early on to a high potassium and lower nitrogen formula the moment those first little green fruits appear on the vine. Match the meal to the exact life stage of your plant. Let us dive into a mistake that physically injures your plants, which is root burn from aggressive feeding. You buy an expensive granular fertilizer, grab a huge handful, and dump it directly against the main stem of your tomato plant. Within days, the plant starts wilting, the leaves turn brown and crispy at the edges, and you wonder what disease attacked your garden. It is not a disease. You chemically burned your plant to death. Synthetic fertilizers are basically heavy salts. When placed right up against the delicate stem and shallow surface roots, these salts suck the moisture right out of the plant tissue. Imagine eating a massive spoonful of dry salt. It makes you instantly dehydrated. That is exactly what your tomato plant experiences. To avoid this, you must always apply granular fertilizer in a wide ring around the plant, at least 6 inches away from the main stem. This is called side dressing. Furthermore, never apply dry food to dry soil. You must water the soil deeply both before and after you fertilize. The water dissolves the nutrients, turning them into a safe, easily drinkable soup for the roots, rather than a harsh, burning chemical powder. Finally, we reach the invisible barrier that ruins countless harvests, ignoring the soil acidity, or pH. You could buy the most expensive, perfect organic fertilizers in the world, carefully apply them at the exact right time, and your tomatoes might still look yellow and sickly. Why does this happen? Because of a phenomenon called nutrient lockout. Tomatoes prefer their soil to be slightly acidic, right around a pH of 6.2 to 6.8. If your soil is too alkaline, say from adding too much wood ash, or too acidic, the roots physically lose the ability to absorb certain nutrients. It is as if you prepared a massive, delicious feast, but then locked your tomato plant inside a glass box where it can only stare at the food. The iron might be right there in the dirt, but high pH makes it invisible to the roots, turning the new leaves completely white. A vivid illustration of this is trying to unlock a door with the wrong key. The door is fine, the key is fine, but they do not work together. Before you spend a single dollar on fancy nutrients, get a cheap pH tester. Fixing your soil acidity will suddenly unlock all the trapped food already sitting in your garden waiting to be eaten. And there you have it, the most surprising, yield-crushing mistakes you can make when feeding your tomatoes. Who would have thought that a viral pharmacy salt trick could actually cause your tomatoes to rot from the bottom up? Or that giving your plants too much love and nitrogen would leave you with a giant bush and zero fruit? Understanding the delicate dance of nitrogen, potassium, calcium, and boron, along with correct timing and soil acidity, completely changes the game. By avoiding these fatal errors, you are setting yourself up for the biggest, juiciest, most bountiful tomato harvest you have ever seen. Thank you so much for watching and spending time in the garden with me today. If you found these tips helpful and want to grow like a pro, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a big like, and share it with your gardening friends. Now, I have a question for you to answer in the comments below. Have you ever accidentally burned your plants with too much fertilizer or fallen for the Epsom salt myth? Let me know your gardening stories down below.